When a billion-dollar CEO's empire crumbles in 60 seconds and the world's most advanced medicine fails, her salvation comes from the most unexpected source, a single father's blood that defies every law of science. But saving her life is just the beginning of a story that will challenge everything you believe about love, sacrifice, and second chances. The mahogany conference table gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the 42nd floor, reflecting the faces of 12 board members who had gathered to witness what they believed would be another routine quarterly meeting. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched endlessly, a concrete jungle where Ava Hale had built her empire one calculated decision at a time. At 34, Ava commanded respect through sheer force of will and an intellect that had turned a small biotech startup into Meridian Pharmaceuticals, a company worth $4.2 billion. Her raven-black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her tailored Armani suit spoke of power that was earned, not inherited. Every person in that room knew that when Ava Hale spoke, the medical industry listened. The quarterly projections show a 17% increase in... Ava's words caught in her throat as a strange sensation washed over her. The numbers on the projection screen began to blur, and for a moment, she felt as though she was floating above her own body. Ms. Hale. Dr. Richardson, the head of research and development, leaned forward with concern etched across his weathered face. "Are you feeling all right?" Ava pressed her palm against the cool surface of the table, trying to anchor herself to reality. "I'm fine. As I was saying, the increase in revenue from our cardiac medication line has exceeded all expectations." The pain hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. Not the sharp, stabbing pain of a heart attack, but something far more sinister. It felt as though her very life force was being drained away, cell by cell, breath by breath. The conference room tilted violently, and the concerned faces around the table became a kaleidoscope of blurred features. "Call 911, someone shouted, but their voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. Ava's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the polished marble floor with a sickening thud. Her body convulsed as whatever was attacking her system began to shut down her organs with ruthless efficiency. The taste of copper filled her mouth as blood trickled from her lips, staining her pristine white blouse. "Get the medical team from the 15th floor," Dr. Richardson barked into his phone while kneeling beside Ava's trembling form. "Tell them it's a code blue emergency." But even as the building's medical staff rushed to the executive floor, even as the paramedics screamed through Manhattan traffic with sirens wailing, Ava's condition deteriorated with alarming speed. Her pulse became thready and weak, her breathing shallow and labored. The woman who had conquered Wall Street and revolutionized modern medicine was dying, and no one could explain why. The ambulance ride to Mount Sinai Hospital was a blur of flashing lights and urgent voices. "We're losing her," the paramedic shouted over the radio. "Blood pressure dropping, pulse weak and irregular. ETA 3 minutes. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, Mount Sinai's chief of emergency medicine, was waiting when they wheeled Ava through the automatic doors. She had been briefed during the ride: mysterious collapse, no known medical conditions, rapid deterioration. In her 20 years of emergency medicine, Dr. Morgan had seen everything from rare tropical diseases to exotic poisonings, but nothing prepared her for what she saw on the monitors. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered, studying the readouts. "Her white blood cell count is through the roof, but there's no sign of infection. Her organs are shutting down systematically, but there's no apparent cause." For 6 agonizing hours, the best medical minds in New York worked to save Ava's life. Blood tests revealed nothing. CT scans showed normal organ function despite the obvious systemic failure. Specialists were called in from across the city: toxicologists, hematologists, infectious disease experts. Each one left more puzzled than the last. "We've tried everything," Dr. Morgan confessed to Dr. Richardson, who had stayed by Ava's side since the ambulance arrived. "Broad-spectrum antibiotics, antiviral medications, even experimental treatments that aren't available to the general public. Nothing is working. Her body is rejecting every intervention we attempt." By midnight, Ava's condition had stabilized at critical. She lay unconscious in the ICU, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with electronic precision. Her face, once vibrant with life and determination, had taken on a ghostly pallor. The rise and fall of her chest was barely perceptible, each breath a small victory in a war her body was losing. Dr. Richardson sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed, his head in his hands. He had worked with Ava for 8 years, had watched her transform Meridian from a struggling startup into a pharmaceutical giant. She was more than his boss. She was a visionary who had dedicated her life to advancing medical science. The irony that medicine itself seemed powerless to save her was not lost on him. "There has to be something we're missing," he whispered to the unconscious woman. "Some test we haven't run, some treatment we haven't tried." That's when Dr. Sir James Rohr walked into the ICU. He hadn't planned to be at Mount Sinai that night. In fact, he had been trying to avoid hospitals altogether for the past 3 years. But his 8-year-old daughter Amelia had fallen from her bike that afternoon. And while her injuries were minor, a scraped knee and a bruised elbow, James's overprotective instincts had demanded an X-ray to rule out any hidden fractures. James was a ghost of the man he had once been. At 36, his brown hair was prematurely streaked with silver, and deep lines of grief had etched themselves around his green eyes. Once he had been Dr. James Rohr, one of the most promising physicians in the country, a man whose research into rare blood disorders had earned him recognition from the World Health Organization. Now he was simply a single father trying to keep his head above water. The death of his wife Sarah 3 years ago had shattered more than his heart. It had destroyed his faith in medicine, in himself, in the belief that good things happened to good people. Sarah had died from a rare blood disorder that no amount of medical expertise could cure, and James had been forced to watch the love of his life slip away, despite having access to the most advanced treatments available. Since then, he had retreated from the medical world entirely. He worked odd jobs, construction, landscaping, whatever would pay the bills and keep him busy enough to forget the sound of Sarah's last breath. The only constant in his life was Amelia, a precocious 8-year-old with her mother's blonde hair and her father's stubborn streak. "Daddy, why do you look so sad all the time?" Amelia had asked him during the drive to the hospital. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. Just tired." Mommy always said that when grown-ups say they're tired, they really mean they're sad but don't want to talk about it. James had to pull over to the side of the road as tears blurred his vision. Even now, 3 years later, Sarah's wisdom lived on through their daughter. By the time they reached Mount Sinai, Amelia's X-rays had confirmed what James already knew: no fractures, just the normal bumps and bruises of childhood. They were walking past the ICU toward the exit when James heard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "Blood work is completely anomalous. We've never seen anything like it. Have you considered Keller's syndrome? It presents with similar symptoms in the early stages. First thing we tested for, negative across the board." James found himself moving toward the voices without conscious thought. Through the glass partition, he could see a woman lying unconscious in the hospital bed, surrounded by more monitoring equipment than he had seen outside of a research facility. Her chart hung at the foot of the bed, and even from a distance, James could see the telltale signs of a medical mystery that had the staff baffled. "Daddy," Amelia tugged at his sleeve. "Can we go home now? I want to show you the picture I drew for Mrs. Peterson." But James was no longer listening. Something about the woman in the bed had triggered a memory, not a visual memory, but something deeper. His hands began to tingle with a familiar sensation, the same feeling he had experienced only once before on the day Sarah died. "Dr. Morgan." James approached the group of physicians clustered around the nurses' station. "I couldn't help but overhear your discussion. May I ask what treatment protocols you've attempted?" Dr. Morgan looked up from the chart she was reviewing. Her eyebrows raised in surprise. "I'm sorry, but patient information is confidential." "Are you a family member?" "No, I'm—" James hesitated. How could he explain that he used to be a doctor without revealing why he was no longer practicing? "I have some experience with rare blood disorders. I might be able to offer a fresh perspective." "Look, I appreciate the offer, but we have some of the best specialists in the country working on this case. Unless you're board certified in hematology or internal medicine, I'm afraid there's nothing you can contribute that we haven't already considered." James started to turn away, but something made him look back at the woman in the bed. The tingling in his hands had become stronger, almost urgent. Against every rational thought in his head, he found himself speaking again. What if it's not a disease at all? What if her body is rejecting something at the cellular level, something that's not foreign, but rather something that's missing? "Dr. So." Morgan paused, her attention now fully focused on the stranger who had wandered into her ICU. "What do you mean missing?" "Some people are born with blood that contains unique antibodies or proteins that serve specific functions. If those proteins are suddenly neutralized or depleted, the body's systems can begin to fail catastrophically." James moved closer to the glass partition, his clinical instincts overriding his desire to remain invisible. "Have you tested for protein deficiency syndromes?" "That's actually not a bad theory," Dr. Richardson admitted, looking up from Ava's chart. "We've been so focused on what might be attacking her system that we haven't considered what might be missing from it." Dr. Morgan studied James with new interest. "You said you have experience with blood disorders. Where did you train?" "Johns Hopkins." James replied automatically, then immediately regretted revealing so much about himself. "But that was a long time ago." "Hopkins has one of the best hematology programs in the country. What made you leave medicine?" The question hit James like a physical blow. Images of Sarah's final days flashed through his mind. The failed treatments, the false hopes, the moment when all of his medical training proved worthless against the disease that stole her from him. "Personal reasons," he said quietly. Before Dr. Morgan could press further, the monitors in Ava's room began beeping frantically. The steady rhythm of her heartbeat became erratic, and her blood pressure plummeted. "She's crashing!" a nurse called out, as the medical team rushed into the room. James watched through the glass as they worked to stabilize Ava's failing systems. The woman who had seemed merely unconscious moments before was now fighting for her life as her body began the final stages of systemic shutdown. Her skin had taken on a blue-gray pallor, and despite the oxygen mask covering her face, her breathing became increasingly labored. "We're losing her," Dr. Morgan called out as she worked to establish another IV line. "Get me 2 units of O-negative stat. Blood bank is out of O-negative, the nurse replied grimly. Citywide shortage due to the 3-car accident on the FDR drive. Next shipment isn't due until morning. Then get me whatever universal donor blood we have left. That's just it, doctor. We're out of universal donor blood entirely. The room fell silent, except for the increasingly urgent beeping of the monitors. James felt his hands begin to shake as he watched the scene unfold. It was Sarah's final moments all over again, the helpless feeling of watching someone die while medicine stood by, powerless to intervene. But then something remarkable happened. The tingling in James's hands became so intense that he had to clench his fists to stop them from trembling, without fully understanding why he found himself speaking. "Use mine." Dr. Morgan looked up from the patient, confusion clear on her face. "Excuse me, use my blood. I'm O-negative universal donor." "Sir, we appreciate the offer, but we can't just use random volunteer blood without proper screening and—" "There's no time for screening," James interrupted, moving toward the door of the ICU. "She's dying right now, and you just said you're out of options." Dr. Morgan hesitated, torn between protocol and desperation. In her 20 years of practice, she had never been in a situation quite like this. The woman on the bed was clearly dying, and conventional medicine had failed completely. The stranger's offer violated every hospital policy she could think of, but something in his voice, a combination of medical authority and desperate urgency, made her reconsider. "Daddy, what are you doing?" Amelia's small voice cut through the tension in the room. James knelt down beside his daughter, his hands still tingling with that strange, inexplicable sensation. "I have to help the sick lady, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to do scary things to help other people. Like when Mommy gave her blood to help other people when she was sick." The innocent question nearly broke James's composure. Sarah had indeed been a regular blood donor before her illness, believing firmly that helping others was a responsibility that came with good health. The irony that he was now in a position to do the same thing was not lost on him. "Yes, honey. Just like Mommy used to do." Dr. Morgan made her decision. "Get me a blood collection kit and prep for an emergency transfusion. And somebody call legal, they're going to want documentation of everything we do here." 10 minutes later, James was lying on a gurney beside Ava's bed as a phlebotomist prepared to draw his blood. The tingling sensation in his hands had spread throughout his entire body, as though every cell was responding to some unseen force. "This is highly irregular," Dr. Morgan muttered as she supervised the procedure. "If the hospital administration finds out about this, we're all going to be looking for new jobs." "Sometimes irregular is exactly what's needed," James replied, watching as his blood flowed through the collection tube. It looked normal, deep red and healthy, but something about it felt different, charged with an energy he couldn't explain. The transfusion began immediately. As James's blood entered Ava's system through the IV line, something extraordinary happened. The monitors that had been screaming with alarm began to stabilize. Her heart rate, which had been weak and erratic, strengthened into a steady rhythm. Her blood pressure began to climb back toward normal ranges. "What the hell?" Dr. Morgan stared at the monitors in disbelief. "Her vitals are improving, significantly." Within 20 minutes, Ava's condition had stabilized to the point where she was no longer in immediate danger. Her color began to return, and her breathing became deep and regular. The mysterious illness that had baffled the best medical minds in New York seemed to be retreating in the face of James's blood. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Richardson whispered, studying the readouts. "It's as though his blood contained some kind of antidote to whatever was killing her." James felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him as the adrenaline began to fade. The tingling sensation in his hands had disappeared completely, leaving him feeling strangely empty, as though some essential part of himself had been transferred to the unconscious woman. "Will she be okay?" Amelia asked, pressing her face against the glass partition. "I think so, sweetheart," James replied, though he wasn't entirely sure why he felt so confident. "I think she's going to be just fine." Morgan approached James as the nurses finished cleaning up the transfusion equipment. "I don't know what just happened here, but I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Your blood didn't just stabilize her, It actually reversed the progression of whatever was attacking her system. Blood is more complex than most people realize, James said quietly. Sometimes the cure isn't found in a laboratory or a pharmacy. Sometimes it's found in the most unexpected places. Where can we reach you? We're going to need to run tests, document everything that happened here tonight. The medical community is going to want to understand how this was possible. James was already helping Amelia gather her things, his desire to disappear warring with his clinical curiosity about what had just occurred. I don't think that's necessary. The important thing is that she's going to recover. But you don't understand what happened here tonight could revolutionize how we treat rare blood disorders. If your blood contains some kind of unique healing properties, we need to study it, understand it. Think of how many people you could help. The words struck James like a physical blow. How many people could he help? He had asked himself that same question every night for 3 years, tormented by the knowledge that his medical training had been useless when it mattered most. He had hidden from medicine, from healing, from the very thing that had once defined his purpose in life. But tonight, for the first time since Sarah's death, he had been able to save someone. Not through advanced medical procedures or experimental treatments, but through something as simple and fundamental as sharing his blood. I need time to think about this, Shu, he said finally. Right now, I just want to take my daughter home and try to process what happened here, Dr. Ma. Morgan handed him her business card. Please don't disappear on us. What you did tonight, it was extraordinary. And I have a feeling this is just the beginning. James pocketed the card without looking at it. As he and Amelia walked toward the elevator, he couldn't resist one final glance back at the ICU. Through the glass partition, he could see Ava lying peacefully in her bed, her face no longer pale and drawn, but showing the healthy color of someone who was truly healing. For the first time in 3 years, James Rohr had saved a life. But as the elevator doors closed behind him, he had no idea that the woman whose life he had saved would soon turn his carefully constructed world upside down. Ava Hale was many things, brilliant, driven, relentless in pursuit of her goals. And when she awakened the next morning, to find herself alive against all odds, she would have only one question on her mind: who was the mysterious man whose blood had given her a second chance at life? The answer to that question would change both their lives forever. But that night, as James tucked Amelia into her bed, in their modest apartment across town, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found a way to honor Sarah's memory. Maybe helping others didn't require him to be a doctor. Maybe it just required him to be human. "Daddy," Amelia's sleepy voice called out as he reached her bedroom door. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm proud of you for helping that lady. Mommy would be proud too." James felt tears sting his eyes as he turned off her light. "Thank you, baby. Sweet dreams." As he walked to his own bedroom, James couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn he never could have anticipated. The tingling sensation was gone, but something had awakened inside him, a sense of purpose he thought he had lost forever. In her hospital bed across the city, Ava's eyes fluttered open for the first time in 18 hours. Her first conscious thought was not about her company or her empire or the board meeting that had started this nightmare. Her first thought was about the stranger whose sacrifice had saved her life and the overwhelming need to find him and understand what had passed between them. The hunt was about to begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Meridian Pharmaceuticals as Ava stepped out of the private elevator onto the executive floor. 3 weeks had passed since the incident that nearly claimed her life, and though her doctors had cleared her for a gradual return to work, she felt anything but normal. The mystery of her miraculous recovery haunted her every waking moment, and the memory of the stranger who had saved her had become an obsession she couldn't shake. "Miss Hale, welcome back." Her assistant Marcus rushed forward with a tablet full of urgent messages and appointment requests. "The board has been asking when you'll be ready to resume full duties, and there are 17 interview requests from medical journals wanting to discuss your recovery." Ava waved him away with barely concealed irritation. "Cancel all the interviews and tell the board I'll meet with them when I'm ready. Right now, I need you to do something else for me." Marcus poised his stylus over the tablet, ready to take notes. In the 5 years he had worked for Ava, he had learned to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what she said next. "I need you to find someone for me. A man who was at Mount Sinai Hospital on the night of my collapse. He would have been there with a young daughter, probably for a minor emergency. I don't have his name, but he's around 36 years old, brown hair with some silver-green eyes. He used to be a doctor." "That's not much to go on," Marcus admitted. "Do you have any idea why he was there that night?" Ava moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. "His daughter had an accident. A bike accident, I think. The child would have needed X-rays. I'll start with the hospital records, but Ms. Hale patient information is confidential. Even with your connections, it might be difficult to, then find another way." Ava's voice carried the steel that had built her empire. "I don't care what it costs or what strings you have to pull. I need to find this man." Marcus nodded and hurried away, leaving Ava alone with her thoughts. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and closed her eyes, trying to recall every detail of that night. The memories were fragmented flashes of consciousness between periods of darkness, but one image remained crystal clear, the moment she had briefly awakened during the transfusion and seen him sitting beside her bed. He had been holding her hand, she was certain of it, though the doctors claimed she had been unconscious throughout the entire procedure. But she remembered the warmth of his touch, the way his green eyes had seemed to glow with an otherworldly intensity. Most of all, she remembered the feeling that had passed between them, a connection so profound, it had left her fundamentally changed. Dr. Morgan had been reluctant to discuss the details of her treatment, citing patient confidentiality and hospital policy. But Ava hadn't become one of the most powerful women in America by accepting no as an answer. Through a combination of generous donations to the hospital and carefully applied pressure, she had eventually learned the truth about her mysterious savior. His name was James Rohr, and according to the limited information she had been able to gather, he had once been a highly respected physician specializing in rare blood disorders. But 3 years ago, he had simply vanished from the medical community, leaving behind a promising career and a reputation for groundbreaking research. The why of his disappearance remained a mystery, but Ava intended to solve it. She had built Meridian Pharmaceuticals by recognizing opportunity where others saw only problems, and she sensed that James Rohr represented the greatest opportunity of her life, though whether professional or personal, she wasn't yet ready to admit. Meanwhile, across the city, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, James was trying very hard to pretend that his life hadn't been turned upside down 3 weeks ago. He had returned to his job at a construction site, spending his days pouring concrete and framing walls work that kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering to thoughts of the woman whose life he had saved. But the dreams were becoming harder to ignore. Every night he found himself reliving those moments in the hospital, feeling again the strange energy that had flowed through him as his blood entered her system. In his dreams, he could see her face clearly, not the pale, unconscious features he had glimpsed in the ICU, but the vibrant, intelligent woman she must have been before the illness struck her down. "Daddy, you're burning the pancakes again," Amelia observed from her seat at the small kitchen table, her blonde hair still messy from sleep. James jerked back to the present, quickly flipping the pancakes before they could burn completely. "Sorry, sweetheart. I guess I was thinking about something else." "You've been thinking about the sick lady a lot lately," Amelia said with the perceptive honesty that only children possess. "Do you think she's all better now?" "I hope so," James replied, though he found himself wondering the same thing. Had his blood truly cured whatever mysterious illness had been killing her, or had it merely delayed the inevitable? The rational part of his mind insisted that what had happened that night was medically impossible, but he couldn't deny the evidence of his own senses. "Maybe we could visit her," Amelia suggested brightly. "I could draw her a picture to help her feel better." James felt his chest tighten at the innocent suggestion. "I don't think that's a good idea, honey. Hospitals have rules about visitors, and besides, she probably doesn't even remember us." But even as he said the words, James knew they weren't true. He remembered the moment their eyes had met in the hospital, just a brief instant, when she had seemed to surface from unconsciousness, and the recognition that had passed between them. It was as though she had seen directly into his soul, understood something about him that he didn't even understand about himself. The ringing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, and James almost let it go to voicemail. But something made him answer. "Hello, Mr. Rohr. This is Marcus Chen from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. I'm calling on behalf of Ms. Ava Hale, and she would very much like to speak with you." James felt his blood turn to ice water. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. You were at Mount Sinai Hospital 3 weeks ago with your daughter Amelia. You donated blood that saved Ms. Hale's life. She's been trying to locate you ever since." James closed his eyes, his worst fears confirmed. He had hoped that his good deed would remain anonymous, that he could return to his quiet life without complications. But apparently, the woman whose life he had saved was not the type to let sleeping dogs lie. "Mr. Rohr, are you still there?" "What does she want?" James asked quietly, moving into the living room, where Amelia couldn't overhear the conversation. "She would like to meet with you to express her gratitude personally. She's also interested in discussing the medical implications of what happened that night. Ms. Hale believes your blood may contain unique properties that could help other people with similar conditions." James felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. This was exactly what he had been afraid of, being pulled back into the medical world that had failed him so completely when Sarah was dying. "I appreciate her gratitude, but I'm not interested in any kind of medical research or publicity. Ms. Hale anticipated you might feel that way. She asked me to tell you that this meeting would be completely confidential, and that she has no intention of involving the media or the broader medical community without your explicit consent. And if I refuse to meet with her..." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Hale is a very determined woman, Mr. Rohr. She's going to find a way to thank you, whether you agree to meet with her or not. Wouldn't it be better to do this on your own terms?" James considered hanging up, but he knew the caller was right. If Ava Hale was determined to track him down, she would succeed eventually. Better to face her directly and make it clear that he wanted no part of whatever she had in mind. "One meeting," he said finally. "Somewhere public, and I'm bringing my daughter. Ms. Hale suggested Central Park near the Bethesda Fountain tomorrow at 2 o'clock. She'll be alone, and she understands that you'll have your daughter with you." After ending the call, James sat in his worn armchair and tried to process what was happening. For 3 years, he had successfully avoided any situation that might remind him of his former life as a physician. He had built careful walls around himself and Amelia, creating a safe, predictable existence that required nothing more than getting through each day. But now those walls were crumbling, and he wasn't sure whether he felt terrified or relieved. The next afternoon found Ava standing beside the Bethesda fountain 20 minutes early. Her usual punctuality amplified by nervous energy. She had changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a simple cashmere sweater, an outfit that was casual enough to avoid intimidating a man who clearly valued his privacy but still reflected her success and confidence. She spotted them before they saw her. A tall man with prematurely silver-streaked hair, walking hand in hand with a blonde girl who was chattering animatedly about something that required elaborate hand gestures. Even from a distance, Ava could see the careful way he scanned their surroundings, the protective posture that spoke of a man who had learned to expect the worst from life. When their eyes met across the crowded plaza, Ava felt the same electric recognition that had passed between them in the hospital. James stopped walking, his expression guarded but not hostile, while Amelia continued her animated conversation, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the air. "Mr. Rohr," Ava said, as she approached them, her voice carefully modulated to convey warmth without overwhelming familiarity. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Ms. Hale," James replied with a slight nod. "This is my daughter Amelia." Amelia looked up at Ava with unconcealed curiosity. "Are you the sick lady Daddy helped at the hospital?" Ava knelt down to Amelia's eye level, genuinely charmed by the child's directness. "I am. And thanks to your daddy, I'm feeling much better now." "I knew he would help you," Amelia said matter-of-factly. "Daddy's really good at helping people, even when he pretends he's not a doctor anymore." James's face flushed with embarrassment. "Amelia, we talked about this. Sometimes grown-ups don't want to discuss their jobs." But Ava was studying James with new interest. "You're not practicing medicine anymore." "Not for 3 years." James replied, his tone making it clear that he didn't want to elaborate. Ava sensed the pain behind his words and decided not to press the issue. Instead, she turned back to Amelia. "Would you like to see the model boats on the pond? I think there might be an ice cream cart nearby, too." Amelia's eyes lit up with excitement, and James found himself nodding despite his reservations. As they walked toward the model boat pond, Ava was struck by the easy companionship between father and daughter. James might be carrying deep emotional wounds, but his love for Amelia was evident in every gesture, every protective glance. "She's beautiful," Ava said as Amelia ran ahead to watch a remote-controlled sailboat navigate the pond. "She looks like her mother." James's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes. Sarah died 3 years ago." The simple statement carried a weight of grief that made Ava's chest ache with unexpected sympathy. She had built her life around avoiding emotional complications, focusing entirely on business and professional achievement. But something about James's quiet pain called to a part of her so she had thought long buried. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." It was. James watched Amelia point excitedly at a particularly elaborate model yacht. "Especially since I couldn't save her." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ava began to understand why a promising physician might abandon medicine. The guilt of losing someone you loved to a disease you couldn't cure would be overwhelming for someone whose entire identity was built around healing others. "Is that why you stopped practicing?" James was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter's innocent joy as she fed breadcrumbs to the ducks. Sarah had a rare blood disorder, something that should have been treatable, especially caught as early as we caught it. But nothing worked. Every treatment failed, every experimental drug, every procedure. I watched her waste away, while the best medical minds in the country stood by helplessly. So you blame yourself, Ava said gently. I blame medicine. James replied, his voice carrying 3 years of accumulated bitterness. I blame a system that promises miracles and delivers false hope. I blame research that focuses on profitable treatments instead of actual cures. Ava felt a spark of indignation at his words. Meridian Pharmaceuticals had invested billions in research that had saved countless lives, but she sensed that arguing the point would only drive James further away. Instead, she tried a different approach. Then why did you help me? If you've lost faith in medicine, why risk getting involved? James turned to look at her directly for the first time since they had met. I don't know, something about that night. I felt compelled to act, as though I didn't have a choice. And you've never experienced anything like that before. The feeling that your blood could heal someone. Never. James hesitated, then continued. But when Sarah was dying in her final days, she would sometimes seem better when I was near her. The doctors said it was probably psychological, the comfort of having family close by. But now I wonder. He trailed off, unable to voice the thought that had been haunting him for weeks. What if he could have saved Sarah if he had understood then what he seemed to understand now? What if his blood contained some property that could have cured her rare disease? Ava sensed his internal struggle and made a decision that surprised even her. Would you like to know what happened to me that night? The real story, not the sanitized version the hospital released to the press. James nodded, and Ava began to speak in a low voice, conscious of Amelia playing nearby. She described the mysterious onset of her illness, the way her body had begun shutting down without apparent cause. She explained how the best doctors in New York had been baffled by her condition, how every treatment had failed. And then your blood entered my system, she continued, and within minutes everything changed. Not just my vital signs, but the fundamental nature of whatever was attacking me. It was as though your blood contained some kind of antidote that targeted the specific mechanism causing my illness. That's medically impossible, James said automatically, his scientific training overriding his personal beliefs. I know. I've run every test imaginable, consulted with specialists around the world. On paper, what happened that night shouldn't have been possible. But I'm alive, completely healthy, with no trace of whatever was killing me. James absorbed this information, his analytical mind racing through the implications. If Ava was right, if his blood truly contained some unique healing property, then the potential applications were staggering. Rare blood disorders like the one that had killed Sarah might be treatable, even curable. But the prospect of returning to the medical world filled him with dread. He had spent 3 years building a life that was safe, predictable, free from the kind of hope that could be cruelly shattered. The idea of exposing himself and Amelia to that vulnerability again was terrifying. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Ava had been preparing for this question since the day she had awakened in the hospital. Initially, I wanted to thank you, to understand what happened and offer you some kind of compensation for saving my life. And now I think we could help each other. Ava chose her words carefully, sensing that James would bolt if she pushed too hard. You have a gift that could save lives, but you don't want to be part of the medical establishment. I have resources and connections that could fund independent research away from the bureaucracy and profit motives you distrust. James felt his pulse quicken. You're talking about human experimentation, using my blood on sick people without understanding how it works or what the risks might be. I'm talking about careful, controlled research designed to understand the mechanism behind what happened to me. If we can isolate whatever compound in your blood has healing properties, we might be able to synthesize it, study it, develop treatments that don't require your direct involvement. The idea was seductive, James had to admit. The possibility of helping people without having to practice medicine again, of honoring Sarah's memory, by ensuring that other families didn't have to endure what he and Amelia had suffered. But it also meant trusting Ava Hale, a woman he had met less than an hour ago. A woman whose reputation for ruthless business practices was legendary, whose company had made billions from the kind of pharmaceutical industry he had learned to despise. "Daddy, look!" Amelia came running back to them, her face glowing with excitement. "The man with the boat said I could help him drive it." James knelt down to his daughter's level, grateful for the interruption. "That sounds like fun, sweetheart. But we should probably head home soon. Can we come back tomorrow, please?" "We'll see," James replied, the standard parental response to requests that required more thought. As they walked back toward the fountain, Ava found herself studying the interaction between father and daughter, with something approaching envy. She had built an empire, accumulated wealth and power beyond most people's dreams, but she had never experienced the kind of unconditional love she saw reflected in Amelia's eyes when she looked at her father. "She's lucky to have you," Ava said quietly. "I'm the lucky one," James replied. "She's the only reason I've been able to keep going these past 3 years." They reached the fountain where they had first met, and Ava sensed that their time together was drawing to a close. James had been polite but guarded throughout their conversation, and she suspected that he was already planning to disappear again, to return to his safe, anonymous life, and pretend this meeting had never happened. "I know you don't trust me," she said, as they prepared to part ways. "You don't know me, and you have every reason to be suspicious of my motives. But I want you to know that what happened that night changed me too." James paused, his hand resting protectively on Amelia's shoulder. "How so?" "For the first time in my adult life, I experienced what it means to be truly helpless. Money couldn't save me, power couldn't save me, intelligence couldn't save me. I was dying, and there was nothing I could do to stop it." Ava's voice carried a vulnerability that few people had ever heard from her. "And then a stranger, someone who owed me nothing, who had no reason to care whether I lived or died, gave me a second chance at life." "Anyone would have done the same thing," James said uncomfortably. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have assumed the doctors knew best, that there was nothing an untrained civilian could contribute. But you trusted your instincts, even though it meant breaking hospital protocol and exposing yourself to potential liability." Amelia tugged at James's sleeve. "Daddy, what's liability?" "It means getting in trouble for trying to help people," James explained with a wry smile. "That's dumb," Amelia pronounced with 8-year-old certainty. "People should help people." Ava laughed, despite herself charmed once again by the child's refreshing honesty. "Your daughter is very wise." "She gets that from her mother," James said softly. As they prepared to leave, Ava reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. But instead of her usual corporate card with its impressive list of titles and achievements, she handed James a simple white card, with only her personal cell phone number written on it. "I don't want you to feel pressured," she said. "But if you ever change your mind about helping people again, if you ever want to honor your wife's memory by ensuring that other families don't have to go through what you went through, call me." James took the card, his fingers brushing against hers for just a moment. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through both of them, a reminder of the connection they had shared in the hospital. "Thank you," he said simply. As they walked away, Ava stood by the fountain, watching them disappear into the crowd. She had conducted thousands of business meetings, negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but she couldn't remember ever feeling so emotionally invested in an outcome. James Rohr represented more than just a medical mystery or a business opportunity. He represented a chance for her to find meaning beyond profit margins and stock prices to use her resources for something genuinely important. But more than that, he had awakened something in her that she had thought dead, the capacity to care about another person's well-being more than her own success. Meanwhile, James walked home with Amelia's small hand warm in his mind churning with possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider. For 3 years, he had told himself that the best way to honor Sarah's memory was to protect Amelia from the world that had failed them. But what if the best way to honor Sarah was to ensure that her death had meaning, that other families might be spared the agony he had endured? "Did you like the nice lady?" Amelia asked, as they boarded the subway for home. "She seemed very nice," James replied carefully. "I think she's lonely," Amelia observed with the startling insight that children sometimes possess. "Like you were before you started helping people again." James looked down at his daughter in surprise. "What makes you say that?" "She had sad eyes like you used to have. But when she talked to us, her eyes got happy, just like yours do when you help people." As the train carried them through the tunnels beneath Manhattan, James found himself thinking about Ava's offer with increasing seriousness. The rational part of his mind insisted that getting involved with her was a mistake, that it would only lead to disappointment and heartbreak. But another part of him, the part that had compelled him to act that night in the hospital, was whispering that maybe, just maybe, he had been given a gift for a reason. And maybe it was time to stop running from that gift and start embracing it. The card with Ava's phone number seemed to burn in his pocket as the train pulled into their station. He hadn't decided whether to call her, but for the first time in 3 years, James Rohr was beginning to think about the future instead of just surviving the present. Unknown to both of them, forces were already moving that would make their decision for them. In a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, a man named Richard Blackwood was reading the preliminary report from the private investigator he had hired to monitor Ava's activities. Richard had been Ava's fiancé once until her ambition and his own controlling nature had torn their relationship apart. But he had never stopped watching her, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim what he considered rightfully his. The report mentioned her mysterious illness and even more mysterious recovery, along with rumors of an unknown man who had somehow saved her life. Richard's eyes gleamed with malicious interest as he considered the possibilities. If Ava had formed an attachment to this stranger, if she cared about him, then he had found the perfect way to remind her that crossing Richard Blackwood always came with consequences. The game was about to begin, and neither James nor Ava had any idea how high the stakes were about to become. The call came at 2 a.m, jolting James from a restless sleep, filled with dreams of hospital corridors and Ava's enigmatic smile. His phone's harsh ring cut through the silence of his small apartment, and for a moment he considered letting it go to voicemail. But something about the urgency of the sound made him reach for it. "Mr. Rohr." The voice was unfamiliar, strained with panic. "This is Dr. Morgan from Mount Sinai. I'm sorry to call so late, but we need your help." James sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "It's Ms. Hale. She's back in the ICU and her condition is deteriorating rapidly. We think her body is rejecting the treatment from before, going into some kind of systemic failure. We've tried everything, but nothing's working. We need you to come in now." The words hit James like a physical blow. 3 weeks had passed since their meeting in Central Park. 3 weeks during which he had wrestled with the decision of whether to call Ava about her research proposal. He had carried her card in his wallet, taking it out dozens of times before putting it away again, unable to commit to reopening the door to a world that had caused him so much pain. Now it seemed the decision had been made for him. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, already reaching for his clothes. "What about Amelia?" he wondered aloud, looking toward his daughter's bedroom. He couldn't leave her alone, but he also couldn't waste time finding a babysitter. As if summoned by his thoughts, Amelia appeared in his doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy," who was on the phone, "the sick lady needs help again, sweetheart. I have to go to the hospital. Can I come with you? I promise I'll be good." James hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Get dressed quickly, okay? We need to hurry." The taxi ride to Mount Sinai passed in a blur of neon-lit streets and mounting anxiety. James found himself gripping Amelia's hand tighter than necessary, his mind racing with possibilities. If Ava's condition was truly deteriorating, if his blood had only provided a temporary reprieve rather than a permanent cure, then what did that mean for both of them? Dr. Morgan was waiting when they arrived, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Thank God you're here. She's been asking for you since she regained consciousness an hour ago." "What happened?" James asked as they hurried toward the ICU. "We're not entirely sure. She came in around midnight complaining of severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. Her blood work shows the same anomalies we saw during her first admission, but accelerated. It's as though whatever was killing her before has returned with a vengeance." They reached the ICU, and James felt his breath catch at the sight of Ava lying in the hospital bed. She looked even more fragile than she had 3 weeks ago, her skin taking on that same ghostly pallor that had frightened him so much during their first encounter. But her eyes were open, and when she saw him through the glass partition, a weak smile crossed her lips. "James," she whispered as he entered her room, Amelia hanging back by the door with Dr. Morgan. "You came." "Of course I came." James moved to her bedside, noting the array of monitors and IV lines that surrounded her like electronic sentries. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," Ava said with characteristic directness. "Again." The honesty in her voice made James's chest tighten. He had seen this progression before with Sarah, the way hope would flicker and fade as each treatment failed. But something about Ava's situation felt different, more urgent, as though time itself was running out faster than it should. "Dr. Morgan says you've been asking for me. Why?" Ava's eyes closed for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were filled with a vulnerability that James had never seen from her before. "Because I think you're the only one who can save me. Again." "Ava, I'm not a doctor anymore. I can give you my blood if that's what you need, but it's not just about the blood." Ava's hand found his, her fingers cold and trembling. "James, I've had weeks to think about what happened between us that night. To analyze it, study it, try to understand it. And I think there's something more going on here than just a medical anomaly." James felt the familiar tingling sensation beginning in his hands, the same energy he had experienced during their first encounter. "What do you mean?" "I mean that from the moment your blood entered my system, I felt connected to you in a way I can't explain. Not just grateful, not just indebted, but genuinely connected, as though part of you had become part of me." The words sent a chill down James's spine because they echoed his own experience so perfectly. For 3 weeks, he had felt an inexplicable pull toward Ava, a sense that their meeting had changed something fundamental about who he was. He had attributed it to the normal aftermath of saving someone's life, but now he wondered if there was something deeper at work. "And now?" he asked quietly. "Now I think that connection is breaking down. Whatever bond was formed between us that night, it's deteriorating, and my body is rejecting everything that isn't. You." Dr. Morgan chose that moment to enter the room, her expression grim. "Mr. Rohr, we need to discuss treatment options. Ms. Hale's condition is deteriorating rapidly, and we're running out of time." James looked between Ava and the doctor, his mind racing. "What are you suggesting?" "Another transfusion, obviously, But this time we need to understand what's happening at the cellular level. We need to monitor the interaction between your blood and hers, document everything, so we can potentially develop a more permanent treatment. And if the transfusion doesn't work this time? Dr. Morgan's silence was answer enough. James felt Ava's hand tighten around his, and when he looked down at her, he saw not the powerful CEO who had built a pharmaceutical empire, but a frightened woman facing her own mortality. In that moment, his decision became clear. "Let's do it," he said. "But I want to understand what's happening too. I need to know why my blood has this effect on her." The next several hours passed in a carefully orchestrated ballet of medical precision. James found himself once again lying on a gurney beside Ava's bed, watching as his blood flowed through the tubing that connected them. But this time, teams of specialists monitored every aspect of the process, taking samples and measurements with scientific rigor. Amelia had been given a comfortable chair in the corner of the room, where she alternated between coloring in a book that one of the nurses had provided and watching the proceedings with wide-eyed fascination. Her presence brought an odd sense of normalcy to the surreal situation, reminding James that no matter what happened here tonight, he still had responsibilities beyond these hospital walls. "The cellular response is remarkable," Dr. Morgan murmured as she studied the latest test results. "Your blood isn't just treating her symptoms, Mr. Rohr. It's actually repairing damage at the genetic level, correcting mutations that shouldn't be correctable." "What kind of mutations?" James asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his emotional exhaustion. "That's what's so strange. The mutations appear to be artificially induced, as though something in her environment has been systematically attacking her DNA. But your blood contains proteins that we've never seen before, compounds that specifically target and reverse that kind of damage." James absorbed this information, his mind working through the implications. "You're saying someone poisoned her deliberately?" "I'm saying that her illness isn't natural. Someone has been slowly killing her using a method so sophisticated that it took weeks for the symptoms to manifest." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and James saw Ava's face go pale with shock and fear. The idea that someone wanted her dead badly enough to engineer such an elaborate method of murder was almost too horrible to contemplate. "Who would do something like this?" Ava whispered. Before anyone could answer, the door to the ICU burst open with a violence that made everyone in the room jump. Richard Blackwood strode into the room with the confidence of a man who was accustomed to getting what he wanted, his expensive suit and perfectly styled hair making him look like he had stepped out of a boardroom rather than off the street at 3 in the morning. "Ava, darling," he said, with false concern, his cold blue eyes taking in the scene with obvious satisfaction. "I came as soon as I heard you were ill again." James felt Ava's hand tighten around his with unmistakable fear, and he didn't need to ask who this man was. The resemblance to a predator stalking wounded prey was too obvious to miss. "Richard," Ava said, her voice carefully controlled despite her weakened condition. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here because I care about you, obviously. We may have had our differences in the past, but I would never want to see you suffer." Richard's gaze shifted to James with unconcealed hostility. "And you must be the mysterious blood donor I've been hearing so much about." James didn't reply, but he studied Richard with the same intensity he would use to evaluate a potential threat. There was something about the man's demeanor, a barely concealed satisfaction, that seemed completely at odds with genuine concern for Ava's well-being. "Richard, visiting hours are over," Dr. Morgan said firmly. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Oh, I don't think so," Richard replied smoothly. "You see, I have some information that might be relevant to Ava's treatment. Information about the cause of her mysterious illness." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of Ava's monitors. James felt his blood pressure spike as the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The artificially induced mutations, the sophisticated poisoning method, the timing of Richard's arrival, it all pointed to a conclusion too terrible to voice. "What information?" Dr. Morgan asked, though her tone suggested she was beginning to suspect the same thing James was thinking. Richard smiled, and the expression was so cold it made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Well, let's just say that I've been very interested in Ava's health for quite some time. Interested enough to ensure that she receives exactly the kind of medical attention she deserves." "You son of a bitch," James said quietly, his voice carrying a fury that made even Richard take a step backward. "You've been poisoning her." "Such harsh language," Richard replied with mock offense. "I prefer to think of it as insurance. You see, Ava and I had an understanding once, an engagement in fact, and when she decided to break that understanding, well, I had to find other ways to ensure she remained in my life." Ava tried to sit up, her face flushed with anger despite her weakened condition. "You're insane. Even for you, this is justice," Richard interrupted. "You humiliated me, Ava, left me standing at the altar while you ran off to build your little empire. Did you really think there would be no consequences?" James felt the rage building inside him, like a physical force threatening to overwhelm his self-control. He had spent 3 years blaming himself for Sarah's death, tortured by the belief that he should have been able to save her. But Sarah had died of natural causes, a genetic disorder that was beyond anyone's control. Ava was dying because a madman had decided to play God with her life. "How?" James asked, his voice deadly calm. "How did you do it?" Richard seemed delighted by the question, apparently viewing it as an opportunity to boast about his cleverness. "Oh, it was really quite elegant. A series of compounds delivered through her cosmetics, her coffee, even the air conditioning system in her office. Each one harmless by itself, but together they created a cascading failure at the cellular level. Untraceable, undetectable, and ultimately fatal." "And you did this because she broke up with you, Doctor?" Morgan asked, her voice filled with disgust. "I did this because she belongs to me," Richard said simply. "And if I can't have her, then no one can." The casual way he spoke about murder as though it were a reasonable response to romantic rejection sent chills through everyone in the room. But James was no longer listening to Richard's words. Instead, he was focused on the monitors showing Ava's vital signs, which were beginning to destabilize again despite the ongoing transfusion. "She's going into cardiac arrest," Dr. Morgan announced, rushing to Ava's bedside as alarms began sounding throughout the ICU. James watched in horror as Ava's body began convulsing, her hand slipping from his as the medical team fought to stabilize her failing systems. The transfusion that had saved her life before seemed powerless against whatever Richard had done to her, and James realized with growing desperation that his blood alone might not be enough this time. "Get him out of here!" he shouted to the security guards who had finally responded to the commotion. But Richard was already backing toward the door, his mission apparently accomplished. "Goodbye, Ava," he called out with mock sadness. "I'm sorry it had to end this way, but you brought this on yourself." As the guards escorted Richard from the room, James found himself face to face with a situation that was all too familiar. Once again, he was watching someone he cared about slip away while medicine failed to save them. But this time, he refused to accept defeat. "What if we increase the transfusion rate?" he asked Dr. Morgan desperately. "Give her more of my blood faster. It's too dangerous. Your body can't sustain that kind of blood loss, and there's no guarantee it would help." James looked at Ava's pale face, seeing Sarah's features superimposed over hers in his mind. Two women both dying from conditions that should have been treatable, both slipping away while he stood by helplessly. But this time was different. This time he had something to offer beyond conventional medicine. "Do it anyway," he said firmly. "Whatever the risk to me, do it." "James, no," Ava whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the alarms. "I won't let you die to save me." "You're not letting me do anything," James replied, taking her hand again and feeling the familiar energy begin to flow between them. "I'm choosing to do this, and for the first time in 3 years, I'm choosing to fight instead of giving up." Dr. Morgan looked between them, seeing something in their connection that transcended medical science. "All right," she said finally, "but we do this carefully, and we stop the moment your vitals become unstable." What followed was the most intense hour of James's life. As his blood flowed into Ava's system at an unprecedented rate, he felt his own strength ebbing away like water through a broken dam. But with each unit of blood he gave, Ava's condition improved marginally, her vital signs stabilizing just enough to keep her alive. Amelia had fallen asleep in her chair, exhausted by the late hour and the emotional intensity of the situation. But her presence continued to anchor James, reminding him that no matter what happened here tonight, he had reasons to survive beyond his own guilt and grief. "James," Ava said during a brief moment when the medical team stepped away to check test results, "if something happens to me, I need you to know something." "Nothing's going to happen to you," James replied, though he could feel his own consciousness beginning to fade around the edges. "Listen to me," Ava insisted with surprising strength. "That night in the hospital when your blood saved my life, it didn't just heal my body. It healed something in my soul that I thought was broken forever. You gave me more than a second chance at life. You gave me a reason to want to live it." The words pierced through James's growing weakness, touching a part of his heart that had been frozen since Sarah's death. "Ava, I love you," she said simply. "I know it's crazy, I know we barely know each other, but that night created something between us that I've never experienced before. And if I die tonight, I needed you to know that these past few weeks, thinking about you, hoping I might see you again, they've been the happiest of my adult life." James felt tears streaming down his face as he struggled to find words that could convey the magnitude of what he was feeling. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that love was too dangerous, that caring about someone only led to heartbreak and loss. But Ava had awakened something in him that refused to be silenced by fear. "I love you too," he whispered the words, feeling like a confession and a prayer all at once. "And you're not going to die tonight. I won't let you." As if summoned by his declaration, the energy that had been flowing between them suddenly intensified. James felt it in every cell of his body, a warmth that seemed to originate from somewhere beyond the physical world. Ava's monitors began showing immediate improvement, her heart rate stabilizing and her breathing becoming deeper and more regular. Dr. Morgan rushed back into the room, her eyes wide with amazement as she studied the readouts. "This is impossible. Her cellular regeneration rate has increased by a factor of 10. Whatever was attacking her system is being systematically neutralized." James barely heard her words, his attention focused entirely on Ava's face as color began returning to her cheeks. The woman who had been dying just moments before was now looking at him with eyes that blazed with renewed life and unmistakable love. "How?" she asked wonderingly. "I don't know," James replied honestly, "but I think it has something to do with what you said about being connected. Maybe the healing isn't just medical, maybe it's emotional too. Dr. Morgan continued monitoring both of their vital signs as the transfusion continued, documenting what she privately believed might be the most significant medical breakthrough of her career. But for James and Ava, the science behind their connection mattered less than the profound truth it had revealed, that love itself could be a form of healing capable of overcoming even the most sophisticated attempts at destruction. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and pink, James finally allowed himself to believe that they had won. Ava was alive, her vital signs strong and stable, her body showing no trace of the poison that had nearly killed her. Richard Blackwood was in police custody, facing charges of attempted murder that would ensure he could never threaten her again. "Daddy," Amelia's sleepy voice interrupted his thoughts. "Is the sick lady all better now?" James looked at his daughter, then at Ava, who was smiling at them both with tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. She's all better now." "Good," Amelia said, with 8-year-old satisfaction. "I knew you would fix her. You always fix the people you love." The innocent words hit James with the force of revelation. His daughter had seen what he had been too afraid to acknowledge, that healing wasn't just about medical knowledge or even miraculous blood. It was about love, connection, and the willingness to risk everything for another person's well-being. Ava reached out and took Amelia's small hand in hers, her touch gentle and warm. "Thank you for sharing your daddy with me, Amelia. He saved my life." "That's what daddies do," Amelia replied matter-of-factly. "They protect the people they love." As the morning sun filled the room with light, James felt something shift inside him, a sense of purpose that had been dormant since Sarah's death finally awakening. He looked at Ava, seeing not just the woman whose life he had saved, but a partner who shared his desire to use their unique connection to help others. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Ava's eyes blazed with determination and love. "Now we change the world." The greatest challenges still lay ahead of them, James knew. There would be questions about his blood investigations into the mechanism behind their connection, pressure from the medical establishment to study and understand what had happened between them. But for the first time in 3 years, he was ready to face those challenges, strengthened by love and driven by a purpose greater than his own pain. Richard Blackwood had intended to destroy them both, but instead he had forced them to discover the true depth of their connection. In trying to tear them apart, he had only made them stronger, more determined to use their gift to ensure that other families would never have to endure what James had suffered or what Ava had nearly lost. The healing had only just begun. 3 months after that terrifying night in the ICU, James stood before the Ethics Review Board at Columbia Medical Center, his hands steady despite the weight of scrutiny from 12 of the most respected physicians in the country. The conference room's stark fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across the mahogany table, where folders thick with medical data and sworn testimony documented the impossible, that his blood contained healing properties that defied every known law of medical science. Dr. Rohr, the board chairman, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, began with clinical precision. "You understand that what you're proposing challenges the fundamental principles of evidence-based medicine. You're asking us to approve human trials based on what can only be described as miraculous healing." James felt Ava's presence beside him like an anchor in turbulent waters. She had insisted on accompanying him to every meeting, every interview, every skeptical interrogation they had faced since deciding to formalize their research. Her support had been unwavering, even when the medical establishment treated them like charlatans or opportunists. "Dr. Hartwell," James replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority he had once wielded as a respected physician, "I understand your skepticism, 3 months ago, I would have reacted the same way to these claims. But the evidence is undeniable. Ms. Hale's complete recovery from an artificially induced genetic disorder that should have been fatal, documented by multiple independent laboratories, witnessed by dozens of medical professionals. Dr. Chen, the board's hematology specialist, leaned forward with barely concealed fascination. The protein structures in your blood samples are unlike anything we've ever encountered. The regenerative compounds appear to target damaged DNA with surgical precision, correcting mutations at the cellular level. If we could synthesize these proteins, that's exactly what we're proposing. Ava interjected, her business acumen evident even in this medical setting. Not exploitation of Dr. Rohr's unique condition, but careful research aimed at understanding and replicating the healing mechanism. We're talking about potential treatments for genetic disorders that currently have no cure. James watched the board members exchange glances, seeing the conflict between scientific skepticism and genuine hope playing out across their faces. He understood their dilemma intimately, the same struggle between rational disbelief and desperate possibility that he had wrestled with since Sarah's death. The risks, Dr. Hartwell continued, are considerable. We're talking about uncharted territory, both medically and ethically. What if the healing properties are somehow tied to Dr. Rohr's emotional connection with the patient? What if they can't be replicated? What if we're chasing a miracle that can't be bottled? The words hit closer to home than Dr. Hartwell could have known. In the 3 months since that night in the ICU, James and Ava had discovered that their connection extended far beyond the medical miracle that had saved her life. They had fallen in love with a depth and intensity that surprised them both, their relationship built on a foundation of shared purpose and mutual understanding that seemed to strengthen their unique healing bond. Dr. Hartwell, James said quietly. 3 years ago, I watched my wife die from a rare blood disorder. I had access to the best medical minds in the country, experimental treatments that weren't available to the general public, and unlimited resources. None of it mattered. Sarah died anyway, and I blamed myself for failing her. The room fell silent, the clinical atmosphere softening as James shared the pain that had driven him from medicine. Even the most skeptical board members seemed moved by the raw honesty in his voice. But that night in the hospital with Ms. Hale, I learned something that changed everything. Sometimes healing isn't about understanding the mechanism or following established protocols. Sometimes it's about recognizing that love itself can be a form of medicine, that human connection can trigger biological responses we don't yet comprehend. Ava reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the natural ease that had developed over months of facing these challenges together. The simple gesture seemed to fill the room with a warmth that transcended the sterile medical environment. You're asking us to approve research based on love, Dr. Chen said, though his tone was more curious than dismissive. That's not exactly a reproducible variable in clinical trials. No, Ava replied. We're asking you to approve research based on results. The love may be the catalyst, but the healing is real, measurable, and potentially replicable. Dr. Rohr's blood contains compounds that didn't exist before our connection formed. That's not mysticism, that's biochemistry we don't yet understand. Dr. Hartwell studied the thick file before her, pages of test results and medical imaging that documented Ava's impossible recovery. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up with the expression of someone reaching a difficult decision. We'll approve a limited trial, she said finally. 5 patients, all with genetic disorders similar to what Ms. Hale experienced. Strict protocols, independent monitoring, and the right to suspend the study at any sign of adverse effects. James felt a surge of emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. After months of skepticism and bureaucratic obstacles, they finally had permission to help people. The possibility that other families might be spared the agony he had endured with Sarah made every challenge they had faced worthwhile. "Thank you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of 3 years of guilt and grief finally being transformed into hope. As they left the medical center, Ava slipped her arm through his, her presence a constant reminder of how dramatically his life had changed. The woman walking beside him was no longer just the patient, whose life he had saved. She was his partner in every sense of the word, someone who shared his vision of using their unique gift to change the world. "So," she said, with the smile that never failed to make his heart skip a beat, "ready to become real doctors again?" James laughed, the sound carrying a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. "I think I've been a real doctor all along. I just forgot what that meant." Their first patient was Maria Santos, a 32-year-old mother of 2, whose degenerative genetic disorder had left her wheelchair-bound and facing a prognosis of months rather than years. James and Ava had spent weeks reviewing her case, consulting with specialists, and developing treatment protocols that honored both scientific rigor and the unique nature of his healing abilities. The treatment took place in a specially designed facility that Ava had funded through Meridian Pharmaceuticals, a state-of-the-art medical center that looked more like a luxury spa than a hospital. The decision to create a healing environment rather than a sterile clinical setting had been James's based on his growing understanding that emotional state played a crucial role in the healing process. "I'm scared," Maria admitted as James prepared for the transfusion that would introduce his blood into her system. Her husband Carlos held her hand, his own fear evident despite his efforts to project confidence for his wife's sake. "That's completely normal," James replied, his voice carrying the warmth and compassion that had made him an exceptional physician before tragedy drove him from medicine. "Fear is a natural response to the unknown. But I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Ava and I are going to be with you every step of the way." Ava moved to Maria's other side, her presence radiating the same calm strength that had helped James rediscover his purpose. "Maria, I was in your position not that long ago. Facing death, feeling hopeless, convinced that I was going to leave my loved ones behind. James gave me more than medical treatment. He gave me a future. And now we want to give you the same gift." As the transfusion began, James felt the now familiar energy beginning to flow through him. But this time it was different, stronger, more focused, as though his connection with Ava had somehow amplified his healing abilities. The monitors tracking Maria's vital signs began showing immediate improvements, her cellular regeneration rate increasing at a pace that defied medical explanation. "How do you do it?" Carlos asked wonderingly, as he watched his wife's condition stabilize and begin to improve. "How do you make the impossible happen?" James and Ava exchanged a look that carried the weight of their shared understanding. How could they explain that their healing abilities seemed to be powered by love itself, that their emotional connection had somehow translated into biological changes that could save lives? "We don't fully understand it ourselves," James admitted. "But we've learned that healing is about more than just medical intervention. It's about hope, connection, and the belief that tomorrow can be better than today." Over the following weeks, Maria's improvement was nothing short of miraculous. The genetic mutations that had been slowly destroying her nervous system were systematically corrected, her mobility gradually returning as her body healed itself from the inside out. But more than the physical changes, it was the transformation in her spirit that moved James and Ava most deeply. The way hope replaced despair in her eyes, the way she began planning for a future she had thought was lost forever. "She's going to dance at her daughter's wedding," Ava whispered to James as they watched Maria take her first unassisted steps in over 2 years. 3 months ago, she was planning her own funeral, and now she's going to dance at her daughter's wedding. James felt tears sting his eyes as he watched the reunion between Maria and her children, their joy and amazement at seeing their mother walk again, a testament to the power of second chances. This was what he had been meant to do with his life, not just practice medicine, but bring hope to families who had been told that hope was impossible. The success with Maria opened doors that had seemed permanently closed. Other patients began arriving at their facility. People with rare genetic disorders who had exhausted conventional treatments and were facing the same hopelessness that James had felt during Sarah's final days. Each case brought new challenges and new discoveries about the healing properties that seemed to flow from their unique connection. But with success came new dangers that neither James nor Ava had anticipated. Richard Blackwood's arrest had sent shockwaves through certain circles of influence, powerful people who had their own reasons for wanting to control or exploit the healing properties that James possessed. The facility had to be equipped with security measures that seemed more appropriate for a government installation than a medical center, and their personal lives had become increasingly restricted as threats from various sources mounted. "We're changing too many paradigms too quickly," Ava explained to James one evening as they reviewed security reports in their shared office. The pharmaceutical industry, the medical establishment, even government agencies, they're all trying to figure out how to control what we're doing. James looked up from the patient files he was reviewing, his expression troubled. "Maybe we should slow down. Focus on understanding the mechanism better before we treat more people." "James, no." Ava moved to stand behind his chair, her hands resting on his shoulders in a gesture that had become their touchstone during difficult moments. "We can't let fear stop us from helping people. That's exactly what they want for us to retreat, to become so concerned about the risks that we forget about the patients who need us." Her words echoed the internal struggle that James had been fighting for months. The rational part of his mind agreed with her completely. They had a responsibility to use their abilities to help as many people as possible. But the part of him that remembered losing Sarah, that had watched Ava nearly die, despite his best efforts, whispered warnings about the dangers of taking on too much too quickly. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked quietly. "What if we lose someone because we pushed too hard, moved too fast?" Ava turned his chair so he was facing her, her eyes blazing with the determination that had built her empire. "Then we'll mourn them and learn from our mistakes and keep trying to save the next person. James, you can't let the fear of failure paralyze you. Sarah wouldn't want that, and neither would any of the patients we might help." The mention of Sarah's name sent a familiar pang through James's heart, but for the first time in 3 years, it was accompanied by something else, a sense that his late wife would indeed want him to use his gift to prevent other families from enduring the loss that had shattered his world. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Morgan, who burst into the office with an urgency that immediately put them both on alert. "We have a problem," she announced without preamble. "A big one." James and Ava exchanged worried glances. Dr. Morgan had become their liaison with the traditional medical community, helping to navigate the complex ethical and legal challenges of their research. For her to arrive unannounced and clearly agitated meant that something significant had gone wrong. "What's happened?" Ava asked. "It's about the 5th patient in our trial, Rebecca Chen, the 8-year-old, with the degenerative muscle disorder. The treatment isn't working, and her condition is deteriorating rapidly." James felt his blood turn to ice. Rebecca was the youngest patient they had treated, a bright-spirited child whose illness had robbed her of the ability to walk or even feed herself. Her parents had brought her to the facility as a last resort, their hope tempered by the knowledge that she might not survive much longer without intervention. "What do you mean it's not working?" James demanded, already reaching for his coat. "I mean that despite multiple transfusions over the past week, her cellular regeneration rate remains unchanged. If anything, her condition is accelerating. We need to get to the hospital now." The drive to their facility felt like the longest journey of James's life. His mind raced through possibilities, trying to understand why his blood would work perfectly for some patients while failing others. The healing properties had never failed before, not with Ava, not with Maria, not with any of the other patients they had successfully treated. They found Rebecca's parents in the family waiting room, their faces etched with the particular kind of despair that comes from watching a child suffer. Mrs. Chen looked up as they approached, her eyes red from crying, but still holding a desperate hope that somehow James and Ava could work another miracle. "Dr. Rohr," she said, rising from her chair with visible effort, "please tell me you can help her. Please tell me there's something more you can do." James knelt down to Mrs. Chen's eye level, his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. This was the nightmare scenario he had feared most, having to tell parents that despite all his abilities, despite the miraculous healings they had achieved with other patients, he couldn't save their child. "Mrs. Chen, I want you to know that we're going to do everything possible for Rebecca. We're going to try different approaches, adjust the treatment protocols, explore every option available to us." "But you don't know if it will work," Mr. Chen said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had already begun preparing for the worst. James couldn't lie to them. "No, I don't know if it will work, but I promise you that we won't give up as long as there's any chance of helping her." They spent the next hour reviewing Rebecca's case files, consulting with specialists, and exploring every possible explanation for why the treatment was failing. The little girl lay unconscious in her hospital bed, her breathing shallow and labored, while machines monitored the steady decline of her vital signs. "James," Ava said quietly, as they stood beside Rebecca's bed, "what if the problem isn't medical? What if it's emotional?" James looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I mean that every successful treatment we've done has involved patients who formed some kind of emotional connection with us. Maria trusted us completely, believed in what we were doing. But Rebecca, she's 8 years old, frightened in pain. Maybe she can't form the kind of bond that makes the healing possible." The theory was both heartbreaking and logical. If their healing abilities were indeed powered by emotional connection, by the kind of love and trust that transcended medical science, then a scared child, who didn't understand what was happening, might not be able to access that healing energy. "So what do we do?" James asked. Ava's answer surprised him. "We love her." Over the next several days, James and Ava took turns sitting with Rebecca, talking to her, reading stories, and simply being present in a way that had nothing to do with medical treatment. Amelia, who had been spending more time at the facility since James had returned to medicine, proved to be the key to reaching the sick child. "Rebecca," Amelia said during one of her visits, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting through the adult complexities surrounding the situation. "My daddy has magic blood that makes people better. But it only works if you believe in magic." Rebecca's eyes, which had been glazed with pain and medication, suddenly focused on Amelia with interest. "Real magic." "Super real magic," Amelia confirmed solemnly. "He used it to save a princess that's Ava, and now they're going to get married and live happily ever after. But first, they have to save all the other sick people, including you." James felt his heart skip a beat at Amelia's casual mention of marriage. He and Ava had talked about their future together, but hearing his daughter speak about it with such certainty made the possibility feel suddenly wonderfully real. Will I be a princess too if the magic works? Rebecca asked, a spark of hope flickering in her young eyes. The very best kind of princess, Amelia replied seriously. A princess who helps other people get better. From that moment forward, Rebecca's response to treatment began to improve. It was gradual, at first subtle changes in her cellular regeneration that might have been dismissed as normal variation. But as the days passed and her connection with James, Ava, and especially Amelia deepened, the healing accelerated until even the most skeptical observers had to acknowledge that another miracle was taking place. I don't understand how this is possible, Dr. Morgan admitted as she reviewed Rebecca's latest test results. From a medical standpoint, what's happening here defies every law of biology I know. Maybe that's the point, James replied, watching Rebecca laugh at something Amelia was whispering to her. Maybe we've been thinking about healing too narrowly, focusing so much on the science that we've forgotten about the human element. As Rebecca's recovery continued, James found himself thinking more and more about Amelia's innocent comment about marriage. The idea of formally joining his life with Ava's had been growing in his mind for weeks, but he had hesitated to bring it up, uncertain about how such a step might affect their working relationship and their unique healing abilities. But watching Ava interact with both Rebecca and Amelia, seeing the way she had embraced not just his medical mission, but his role as a father, James realized that his hesitation was based on fear rather than logic. The love between them had already proven its power to heal. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge that truth publicly and permanently. The opportunity came during Rebecca's discharge ceremony, a celebration that had become tradition at their facility for patients who achieved full recovery. Rebecca's parents wept with joy as their daughter walked out of the medical center on her own 2 feet, her future restored by what could only be described as a miracle. Dr. Rohr, Rebecca said as she prepared to leave, will you come to my wedding when I grow up? James knelt down to her level, in his heart full of affection for the brave little girl who had taught him so much about the power of hope. I'll try my best to be there, princess. And will Ava be there too, and Amelia? James looked at Ava, seeing his own hopes and dreams reflected in her eyes. Well, that depends on whether Ava wants to be part of our family forever. The words hung in the air for a moment, the impromptu proposal catching everyone in the room by surprise. But Ava's smile lit up the space like sunshine breaking through clouds, and when she spoke, her voice carried a certainty that left no room for doubt. I can't think of anything I want more, she said simply, as Rebecca clapped her hands with delight, and Amelia squealed with excitement. James felt a profound sense of completion settle over him. For 3 years, he had believed that his capacity for happiness had died with Sarah. But Ava had shown him that love wasn't a finite resource, that opening his heart to her didn't diminish his love for Sarah, but rather honored it by creating new possibilities for healing and hope. The engagement announcement sent ripples through both the medical community and the business world, their love story becoming a symbol of hope for people facing their own seemingly impossible challenges. But for James and Ava, the most important audience was the patients who continued to arrive at their facility, people who had given up hope and found it restored through a combination of cutting-edge science and something far more fundamental, the healing power of love itself. As they planned their wedding, James and Ava also planned the expansion of their work, developing protocols that could be replicated at other facilities around the world. The goal was not just to heal individual patients, but to transform the way medicine itself was practiced, acknowledging that emotional and spiritual wellness were just as important as physical health. We're going to change everything, Ava said one evening, as they reviewed architectural plans for new treatment centers, their shared vision of the future spread out before them, like a roadmap to a better world. "We already have," James replied, pulling her close and marveling at how completely she had transformed his understanding of what was possible. "We just need to help everyone else catch up." The healing had become more than a medical anomaly. It had become a movement powered by love and sustained by hope. And at its center were two people who had found in each other not just romantic love, but a shared purpose that gave meaning to their miraculous gift. The future stretched before them, filled with challenges and possibilities in equal measure. But for the first time since Sarah's death, James faced that future with unshakable confidence, knowing that whatever obstacles they encountered, they would face them together. The morning of their wedding dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that seemed to promise miracles. James stood at the window of his suite at the Plaza Hotel, watching Central Park come alive with the first light of spring, and marveled at how completely his life had been transformed. 2 years ago, he had been a broken man hiding from his past, convinced that his capacity for love had died with Sarah. Now he was hours away from marrying a woman who had not only saved his soul, but helped him discover a purpose greater than he had ever imagined possible. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and Amelia burst in, wearing her flower girl dress, her blonde hair crowned with a wreath of white roses that made her look like a fairy tale princess. At 10 years old, she had grown into a confident, compassionate child whose wisdom often surprised the adults around her. "Daddy, are you nervous?" she asked, settling beside him on the window seat, with the casual intimacy that had always characterized their relationship. "A little," James admitted, though what he felt was more anticipation than anxiety. "Are you nervous about getting a new mommy?" Amelia considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Ava's been like a mommy to me for a long time already. The wedding just makes it official." She paused, then added with characteristic insight, "I think Mommy Sarah would be happy that we found someone who loves us the way she did." James felt his eyes sting with tears at his daughter's words. Over the past 2 years, Amelia had seamlessly integrated Ava into their small family unit, and Ava had embraced the role of stepmother with a devotion that never failed to move him. Together, they had created something beautiful and whole from the fragments of their separate lives. "I think you're right, sweetheart," James said, pulling Amelia close. "I think Mommy Sarah would love Ava almost as much as we do." Across the city, in her own suite at the same hotel, Ava was having a remarkably similar conversation with Dr. Morgan, who had become not just her physician, but one of her closest friends. The clinical setting where they had first met had evolved into a deep, personal bond built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "Having second thoughts?" Dr. Morgan asked as she helped Ava into her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation that seemed to glow against her dark hair. "Not for a second," Ava replied with absolute certainty. "If anything, I'm wondering how I got so lucky. 2 years ago, I was dying alone in a hospital bed, convinced that my life was nothing more than quarterly reports and board meetings. Now I'm about to marry the most extraordinary man I've ever known, and we're building something together that could change the world." The transformation in Ava had been as dramatic as James's own healing journey. The ruthless CEO, who had once measured success solely in financial terms, had discovered that true fulfillment came from using her resources to help others. Under her leadership, Meridian Pharmaceuticals had shifted its focus from profit maximization to breakthrough treatments for rare diseases, often providing medications at cost to patients who couldn't afford them. "The foundation is really taking off," Dr. Morgan observed as she adjusted Ava's veil. "I heard you're opening 3 new treatment centers this year." 5, actually," Ava corrected with the satisfaction of someone whose dreams were becoming reality. One in Los Angeles, one in Houston, one in Chicago, and two internationally, London and Tokyo. Each one will be staffed with physicians trained in James's methods, combining traditional medicine with what we've learned about the healing power of emotional connection. The Blood of Hope Foundation, as it had come to be known, represented the practical application of everything James and Ava had discovered about healing during their time together. While James's blood remained unique and irreplaceable, they had learned that the principles behind their success treating patients as whole human beings, rather than collections of symptoms acknowledging the role of hope and love in recovery, creating healing environments that nurtured the spirit as well as the body, could be taught and replicated. And the research, any progress on synthesizing the healing compounds? Ava's expression grew thoughtful. That's the beautiful mystery, isn't it? We can identify the proteins, map their structure, understand their function at the molecular level. But every attempt to recreate them artificially has failed. It's as though they only exist as long as James and I are connected, as long as our love continues to generate whatever energy creates them. It was a truth that had both frustrated and fascinated the scientific community. James's blood contained compounds that could heal genetic disorders, repair damaged tissue, and reverse degenerative diseases. But those same compounds could not be synthesized in a laboratory, could not be mass-produced or patented. They seemed to exist only as a byproduct of the profound emotional bond between James and Ava, a tangible manifestation of love that defied every attempt at scientific replication. The wedding ceremony itself took place in the Central Park Conservatory Garden, the same park where James and Ava had first met as adults, where their cautious conversation had begun the journey that led them to this moment. The guest list was small but meaningful: family, close friends, colleagues from the foundation, and several of the patients whose lives had been transformed by their work. Maria Santos was there, radiant with health, and accompanied by her husband and children. Rebecca Chen, now a healthy 10-year-old, served as one of Amelia's fellow flower girls, her presence a living testament to the power of hope and healing. Dr. Morgan stood as Ava's maid of honor, while Dr. Richardson, who had become one of James's closest collaborators, served as his best man. But perhaps the most meaningful presence was that of Sarah herself, honored not as a ghost from the past, but as the foundation upon which James's capacity for love had been built. Her photograph sat on a small table beside the altar, surrounded by white roses and bathed in golden afternoon sunlight, a reminder that love doesn't end with death, but continues to shape and inspire long after physical presence is gone. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, but James barely heard the traditional words. His attention was focused entirely on Ava, who stood before him in her wedding dress, looking like a vision of everything he had never dared to hope for. Her eyes sparkled with tears of joy, and when she smiled at him, he felt the familiar energy that had first connected them in that hospital room 2 years ago. When the time came for their vows, James spoke words that came directly from his heart, unscripted and raw with emotion. "Ava, when I first met you, I was a man who had forgotten how to hope. I had convinced myself that love was too dangerous, that caring about someone only led to heartbreak and loss. But you taught me that love isn't something to be feared, it's something to be embraced, nurtured, and shared with the world." His voice caught slightly as he continued. "You didn't just save my life that night in the hospital. You saved my soul, my capacity for joy, my belief that tomorrow could be better than today. And now, as we stand here together, I promise to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of the gift you've given me." Ava's own vows were equally heartfelt, her usual corporate composure replaced by vulnerability and overwhelming love. "James, before I met you, I thought strength meant standing alone, that success was measured by what you could accumulate rather than what you could give away. But you showed me that true strength comes from connection, that real success is measured by the lives you touch and the hope you inspire. She reached out to take Amelia's hand, as well as James's, creating a circle of connection that encompassed their entire family. I promise to love you both with everything I have, to be the mother Amelia deserves, and to use whatever gifts we've been given to heal a world that desperately needs healing. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was witnessed not just by their guests, but by something deeper, a sense that the universe itself was celebrating this union of two souls who had found in each other the power to transform pain into purpose, loss, into love and miracles, into medicine. The reception that followed was held in the same conservatory where they had exchanged vows. The space transformed into a garden party that felt more like a family reunion than a formal celebration. Patients mingled with physicians, children played among the flowers, while their parents shared stories of recovery and hope. And everywhere there was laughter, tears of joy, and the unmistakable sense that something profound was being celebrated. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Richardson announced during the toast portion of the evening, "I've known James Rohr for over a decade, first as a brilliant young physician who seemed destined for greatness, then as a broken man who had lost his way, and finally as someone who discovered that his greatest gift wasn't his medical knowledge, but his capacity to love." He raised his glass toward the couple who sat at the head table with Amelia between them, the picture of a family that had been forged by choice rather than circumstance. James and Ava have shown us that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken, it's about creating something beautiful from the pieces that remain. Their love story has literally saved lives, and their marriage represents hope for everyone who believes that tomorrow can be better than today. As the evening continued, guests shared their own stories of how James and Ava's work had touched their lives. Parents spoke of children who had been given second chances. Spouses talked about marriages that had been strengthened by facing medical crises together. And physicians described how their approach to patient care had been revolutionized by witnessing the power of compassionate healing. But perhaps the most moving moment came when Maria Santos approached the microphone, her voice shaking with emotion as she addressed the assembled crowd. "2 years ago, I was preparing to die," she said simply. "I had said goodbye to my children, made peace with my husband, and accepted that my time on earth was ending. Dr. Rohr and Ava didn't just give me medical treatment. They gave me hope when hope seemed impossible." She gestured toward her family seated at a nearby table. "My daughter graduated from high school last month, and I was there to watch her walk across that stage. My son just started college, and I helped him move into his dormitory. These are moments I thought I would never see, experiences I thought I would never have." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "But more than that, James and Ava taught me that healing is something we can all participate in. Every act of kindness, every moment of compassion, every time we choose love over fear, we're all part of the healing that this world needs." As the formal reception wound down, James and Ava found themselves alone for a few minutes in the conservatory's rose garden, the evening air filled with the scent of flowers and the distant sound of laughter from their remaining guests. The weight of the day, the magnitude of the commitment they had just made, and the overwhelming joy of being surrounded by so much love had left them both feeling emotionally exhausted and spiritually renewed. "Do you think we can really do it?" Ava asked, leaning against James's shoulder as they watched Amelia chase fireflies with Rebecca and several other children. "Change the way medicine is practiced, heal the world, one patient at a time." James considered the question seriously, thinking about all the challenges that lay ahead. The medical establishment was slowly accepting their methods. but there was still significant resistance from those who preferred the familiar boundaries of traditional practice. Pharmaceutical companies were threatened by their model of treating patients rather than maximizing profits. Government agencies were struggling to regulate treatments that seemed to operate outside the normal paradigms of scientific medicine. "I think we can make a difference," he said finally. "Maybe not change everything overnight, but certainly create ripples that will spread far beyond what we can see right now. Every patient we help becomes an advocate for our approach. Every physician we train goes back to their practice with new understanding. Every family that experiences this kind of healing becomes living proof that there's a better way." He turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face with infinite tenderness. "But even if we only help one more person, even if our work never extends beyond the patients we can personally treat, it will have been worth it. Because we'll have honored the gift we've been given, and we'll have used our love to make the world a little bit brighter." Ava felt tears well up in her eyes, at his words, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization of how completely her life had been transformed. The woman who had once measured success solely in quarterly profits now understood that true wealth came from the love she shared with James and Amelia, the lives they touched through their work, and the hope they inspired in people who had given up on hope. "I love you," she whispered the simple words, carrying the weight of everything she felt but couldn't express. "I love you too," James replied, sealing the promise with a kiss that seemed to generate its own light in the gathering darkness. Their honeymoon was deliberately simple, a week at a lake house in upstate New York, just the three of them with no phones, no medical crises, no demands from the outside world. They spent their days swimming and fishing and reading, their evenings cooking together and playing board games and talking about their dreams for the future. It was the kind of domestic bliss that both James and Ava had thought was impossible for people with their responsibilities and ambitions. "Daddy," Amelia said, on their last night at the lake as they sat around a campfire roasting marshmallows, "when we go back home, are you and Ava going to keep saving people? What do you think we should do?" James asked, curious about his daughter's perspective on their work. Amelia was quiet for a moment, her young face serious in the firelight. "I think you have to keep helping people because that's what love does. Love doesn't keep itself hidden. It shares itself with everyone who needs it." James and Ava exchanged glances over Amelia's head, once again, amazed by the wisdom their daughter possessed. In her simple statement, she had captured something profound about the nature of their calling and the responsibility that came with their unique abilities. "You're absolutely right, sweetheart," Ava said, reaching over to smooth Amelia's hair. "Love is meant to be shared." When they returned to New York, they found that their work had continued to expand in their absence. The Foundation's treatment centers were reporting remarkable success rates, with patients experiencing not just physical healing, but profound improvements in their overall quality of life. Medical schools were beginning to incorporate their principles into their curricula, teaching future physicians to treat the whole person rather than just the disease. But perhaps most significantly, other people with unusual healing abilities had begun coming forward, inspired by James and Ava's example, to share their own gifts with the world. A musician in Nashville, whose compositions seemed to accelerate recovery in comatose patients. An artist in San Francisco whose paintings helped people process trauma and grief. A teacher in Atlanta whose presence in pediatric wards reduced children's pain levels and shortened their hospital stays. "We're not alone," James realized as he reviewed reports from around the country. "There are others out there, people with gifts they've been hiding or dismissing as coincidence. Our story has given them permission to step forward and use their abilities to help people." The discovery led to the creation of the Healers Network, a global organization dedicated to identifying, training, and supporting individuals with unusual healing abilities. What had begun as James and Ava's personal journey had evolved into a movement that was quietly revolutionizing the way humanity approached health, wellness, and the connection between emotional and physical healing. 5 years after their wedding, James stood in the pediatric wing of the New York Treatment Center, watching Amelia, now 15, and volunteering as a junior counselor, read stories to a group of young patients. The sight filled him with profound satisfaction, not just because of his pride in his daughter's compassion, but because of what it represented about the world they were creating. These children would grow up believing that healing was about more than just medicine, that love and hope were essential components of any treatment plan, that miracles were possible when people cared enough to make them happen. They would carry that understanding into adulthood, creating a generation that approached health and healing with a fundamentally different perspective than their parents had possessed. "Proud, Papa?" Ava asked, joining him at the observation window. "Incredibly proud," James replied, slipping his arm around his wife's waist. "Of her, of us, of everything we've built together." At 45, Ava had never looked more beautiful or more content. The stress lines that had once marked her face from years of corporate pressure had been replaced by laugh lines, and the kind of peaceful radiance that came from living a life aligned with one's deepest values. Her hair was streaked with premature silver that she wore like a badge of honor, and her eyes held the wisdom that came from understanding what truly mattered in life. "Dr. Morgan called this morning," she said, her voice carrying barely contained excitement. "The World Health Organization wants to formally recognize our protocols as a legitimate medical practice. They're proposing to establish integrative healing centers in developing countries using our model to treat populations that have limited access to traditional medicine." James felt his heart race at the implications. "That's incredible. How many people could we potentially reach?" "Millions," Ava replied simply. "Maybe tens of millions if we can train enough practitioners and establish enough centers." The magnitude of the opportunity was both thrilling and overwhelming. What had begun as James's desperate attempt to save a dying woman had evolved into a global movement that could fundamentally change how humanity approached health and healing. The ripples they had created were spreading far beyond anything they had imagined possible. "Are you ready for that kind of responsibility?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. "With you by my side, I'm ready for anything." As they watched Amelia finish her story and help the young patients settle down for their afternoon rest, James reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain of losing Sarah would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had become the foundation for something beautiful and meaningful. A reminder that love persists even in the face of loss, and that healing is always possible for those brave enough to hope. "James," Ava said quietly, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been at the hospital that night, if you had decided not to help me?" James considered the question seriously, trying to imagine a world where their paths had never crossed. "I think we would have found each other eventually," he said finally. "Maybe not in the same way, maybe not under the same circumstances, but somehow, somewhere, we would have found each other. Some connections are too strong to be left to chance." Ava smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. Their love had been forged in crisis and tested by challenge, but it had proven to be unbreakable, a force that generated healing not just for themselves, but for everyone their lives touched. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice carrying a note of nervous excitement that made James turn to face her fully. "What is it?" Ava's smile widened, and when she spoke, her words carried the promise of new miracles yet to come. "I'm pregnant." The simple statement hit James like a thunderbolt, filling him with a joy so profound it nearly brought him to his knees. After 5 years of marriage, they had talked about having children together, but Ava's age and the demands of their work had made them cautious about getting their hopes up. "Are you sure?" He whispered, his hands instinctively moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Dr. Morgan confirmed it this morning, 8 weeks along. Perfectly healthy, and according to the preliminary tests, the baby is already showing some of the same unusual blood characteristics that you have. James felt tears streaming down his face as the full implications of her words sank in. Their child would be born with the healing gift, would grow up understanding that love was the most powerful medicine in the world, would carry on their work long after they were gone. "Amelia's going to be so excited," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She already knows," Ava admitted with a laugh. "I couldn't keep it from her, she's too perceptive. She asked me this morning if I was feeling okay, and when I told her why I was tired, she just smiled and said she'd been hoping for a baby brother or sister." As they stood together in the hallway of their healing center, surrounded by the soft sounds of children at rest, and the distant murmur of medical staff caring for their patients, James felt a profound sense of completion settle over him. His journey from grief-stricken widower to healer, from broken man to devoted husband and father, had led him to this perfect moment of anticipation and joy. "What should we name the baby?" Ava asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in the midst of overwhelming emotion. James thought for a moment, then smiled. "If it's a girl, how about Hope? And if it's a boy, maybe Chance." "Hope and Chance," Ava repeated, testing the names. "I like them. They're perfect for children who will grow up believing in miracles." As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows of their healing center, painting everything in golden light, James and Ava began planning for a future that seemed unlimited in its possibilities. Their love had already proven capable of healing the sick, transforming lives, and inspiring others to discover their own gifts. Now it would create new life, a child who would be born into a world where love and healing were inextricably connected. 10 months later, Hope Ava Rohr entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to announce her intention to carry on her parents' work. Born with the same unusual blood characteristics that had made James famous, she would grow up understanding that her gift was meant to be shared, that healing was not just a profession, but a calling. Amelia, now 16, proved to be the perfect big sister, devoted to Hope's care, and already showing signs of developing her own healing abilities, not through blood transfusions, but through an intuitive understanding of what people needed to feel better. What words to speak to ease pain, what presence to offer to bring comfort. As James held his infant daughter for the first time, feeling the familiar energy flowing between them, he thought about all the patients who would benefit from her gift, all the families who would be spared the agony he had once endured, all the miracles yet to be performed by this tiny person who carried within her blood the power to heal the world. "She's beautiful," Ava whispered from her hospital bed, exhausted but radiant with joy. "She's perfect," James agreed, marveling at how completely his understanding of perfection had changed over the years. Once he had thought perfection meant avoiding loss, preventing pain, controlling outcomes. Now he understood that perfection was found in love that persisted despite loss, hope that endured through pain, and the courage to keep reaching for miracles, even when miracles seemed impossible. The Blood of Hope Foundation continued to grow and evolve, establishing healing centers on every continent, training thousands of practitioners in their methods, and helping millions of patients discover that healing was possible, even when conventional medicine had nothing left to offer. The Foundation's logo, a simple heart surrounded by a circle of clasped hands, became a symbol of hope for people facing their darkest hours. But for James and Ava, the Foundation's greatest achievement was not measured in statistics or success rates. It was measured in moments like this one, holding their newborn daughter, while their older daughter looked on with love and pride, surrounded by colleagues who had become family, knowing that their love had created something beautiful and lasting that would continue to heal the world long after they were gone. Years would pass, and Hope would indeed grow up to become a healer like her father, using her gift to continue the work that James and Ava had begun. Amelia would become a pioneering researcher, finding ways to amplify the healing abilities of others and creating new treatments that combined cutting-edge science with the power of human connection. The ripples they had created would continue to spread, touching lives in ways they could never have imagined. But on this day, in this perfect moment of new beginning, James and Ava simply held their daughter close and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From the desperate night in a hospital ICU, when a stranger's blood had saved a dying woman's life, to this moment of joy and promise. Their love story had proven that miracles were not just possible but inevitable when people had the courage to love without reservation. The healing would continue, carried forward by love that had transcended death, hope that had survived despair, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. In the end, James and Ava had discovered the most powerful truth of all, that a single drop of blood could heal a body, but a single act of love could heal a soul, and that combination was enough to change the world. Their legacy would live on in every patient who experienced unexpected recovery, every family who found hope in the midst of crisis, every healer who discovered that the most powerful medicine was the love they carried in their own hearts. The blood of hope had become more than a foundation. It had become a promise that love would always find a way to heal what seemed hopelessly broken. And in holding their daughter close, James and Ava held that promise for the future, knowing that their love story was not ending, but beginning anew with each life it touched, each heart it healed, each miracle it made possible.